So going back to Job, then I think that, okay, we have this idea that there are specific divine beings. Sometimes they're called by unique category terms.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are familiar with terms like angels and demons, with New Testament, like that's probably the most popular vernacular. But the Hebrew Bible gives a variety of terms to different divine beings, whether you have the kruvim or the cherubim, as you'll hear in English. In some sections, you also have seraphim or the seraphim in Isaiah 6. In 2 Kings, we have a specific divine being speaking up about his idea. And in Job 1, we also have a divine being who's actually even called and given a title.
Yeah.
So, which is Hasatan.
Yeah. Good.
I don't know if we want to dive into this already.
Let's do. Well, first, before we do, let's also mention that we have the Vayavo'u B'nei HaElohim, right?
Yes.
So you have the B'nei HaElohim as well.
Yeah, so that's important. I think some people,
important. Yeah.
I think some people might forget because Hasatan, or sometimes translate adversary or Satan, depending on your translation. When we look at the scene, we might think, oh, it's God Hasatan, and like it's just them.
Right.
But we forget, like there's a whole slew of divine council members here.
So before we get in, so that's good. So before we get into what the Hasatan is, I want to ask you a question. So we have B'nei Elohim, and then we have Lehityatzeb al Adonai. So they all are standing amongst the Lord. Vayavo'u gam Hasatan betocham. So my question then for you is the Hasatan part of the B'nei HaElohim? Or do you think this verse is suggesting that the Hasatan is just amongst the B'nai HaElohim, but not actually classified as a B'nai HaElohim?
That is a great $1 million question. Well, I was hoping to ask you the question, but you beat me to it. I guess I have to answer now.
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? I don't know. So
yeah, this one's tough. I think people coming from a Christian perspective, a New Testament first perspective, and given, I think, some of the more common translations is to translate this as Satan. It seems pretty straightforward, I think, from that vantage point. If that's where you're coming from, you read verses in Revelation that connect ideas between the serpent of old, the devil, who's called Satan, like readings like that. So, oh, of course, this is Satan, and of course he doesn't belong in this divine council. He's just interrupting the meeting. It gets a lot more tricky, though, if we say, let's just approach Job on its own terms. And even if it's not just Job, let's say I just want to approach the Hebrew Bible on its own terms. The reason why it's tricky on the first level is just the word is not Satan. It's Ha-Satan.
Good.
The Satan.
Yeah.
And so you have the word the with name. And, the closest thing we could think of as we were talking about for this episode is you have Ha-Elohim sometimes referring to God. The God is a way of referring to God. So like it's not out of the
Elohim. Yeah.
So, well, I think that'd be a little different.
That is because it's right
construct form.
Yeah, yeah.
But you do have the word Ha-Elohim used in certain passages. And you wouldn't know this in English, by the way, because they don't translate it as the God.
Yeah, like Exodus 1:7.
There's certain verses. Is that a verse? Yeah, maybe we can pull that up. Yeah, so it says, Va-tir'ena ha-miyaldot et ha-Elohim. And when you read in English, what you'll see is the midwives fearing God, or in the NAT, but the midwives feared God. Literally in Hebrew, it's they feared the God.
Yeah.
And I did not do the statistical information to show how many times that appears. Based on my cursory reading, I think it appears more often when you get toward later biblical Hebrew, not exclusively, obviously, but it's just, it's to me, it seems a way that they're trying to, like, Elohim is a little more ambiguous of a term. It depends on the context, how you translate it, where Ha-Elohim, I think, is a way to potentially make it more clear. We're talking about the God.
That's
as
right.
As in the Lord.
Yeah.
So you have that example. So I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility that Ha-Satan could be a way of referring, kind of like the God. It's the adversary, wink, wink, Satan. Like, the devil. Like currently, I think if you only try to understand Satan from the Hebrew Bible perspective, there's just not a lot of information.
No.
And it's just not enough for me to get a clear picture.
Hmm.
And so I totally understand people wanting to take the canonical approach and say, hey, New Testament's here now too. Let's bring it all together, try to read into it. But again, we have to remember that the puzzle is made by the pieces.
Yeah.
And so at some point we have to be careful if we come to a supposition, if you will, based on some data,
Yeah.
and then interpret all other data from that presupposition.
Yeah.
At some point, we got to realize, well, this other data could inform the other part of the conversation, because the other
Right.
possibility here is that this is a divine being with a role, because the verbal form of this word is used to describe the angel of the Lord in the book of Numbers, not the noun, I think, but I think it's just the verb there.
Yeah.
But still, that
Listen.
the angel of the Lord opposes the way that this donkey is traveling because of the false prophet um, who is there. So for me, currently, I personally lean toward reading this as that this is actually a member of the divine council who would not be associated with who we think of as Satan, but that this is the adversary, as the JPS translates this,
Yep.
and that this would be a member of the divine council whose role, pun intended, is to be a devil's advocate and someone to be thinking about different angles. And this
Hmm.
person says, like, hey, does he really serve you for nothing?
Yeah.
Um, you know, do you not see that the reason he worships you is because of this, that, and the other? So I understand other people would reach the other side of this of that conclusion, but that's where I currently land.
So good.
At
No,
this
it's
point.
very good. That was fantastic. And it's correct. So if we're just going to go with the Hebrew Bible and the book of Job, then what we have in Hasatan is the office of the Satan, right? And we have the adversary, as Monty made clear here with the JPS translation. I really like how John Walton, great scholar of the Hebrew Bible in the Near East, he in his commentary translates this as the challenger, right? And I think that he's really making a good point in that translation as well, that what's really happening here is that this divine being's role in the story, but in the council, is to challenge to challenge Yahweh here. And that is so important to the rest of the narrative that is coming. Because if you don't get this right, you're going to misunderstand the remainder of what's happening in Job. There's a reason why this divine council scene comes. And right off the bat, we have to make clear that we, the readers, are privy to this knowledge of what's happening in the divine council. So we have been made aware of it. But Job has no idea, right? He has no clue about what's about to happen here in the divine council realm. He is blind to it. He's ignorant to it. He has not been allowed to have the knowledge of it. And so again, an office, Hasatan, he comes amongst the B'nai Elohim and the B'nai Ha-Elohim. And what I was really trying to parse here, and I think it's a great question. I don't know if it really is, but I think it's a nice question. The B'nai Ha-Elohim to me are a different class than the Seraphim, the Seraphim and the Cherubim, and other divine beings. I think the B'nai Elohim are their own class. And so my question is this Hasatan figure thought to be amongst the B'nai Elohim? Is he a B'nai Elohim, B'nai Ha-Elohim in class? Or is he another office and figure altogether, the Hasatan? And if we think about Job in particular, it might just be that the Hasatan is in fact its own classification, different than the B'nai Ha-Elohim, but it could be that the Hasatan is actually part of the B'nai Ha-Elohim, like in being in class, if you will. So
Yeah, that is an interesting thought. Not just clumping all divine beings
right.
into one category, because the Hebrew Bible itself uses different terms,
Yeah.
and that's for a reason.
Yeah,
So
those living creatures are not like the cheruvim, right? Or the bnei Elohim. So
yeah, so that would be an interesting thought. You have me thinking now because I think I've typically thought of B'nai Elohim as the broadest overarching term.
mhm.
That within that you have, Kruvim,
Sure.
Seraphim, Malachim. But that'd
Could
be
be the
interesting
case.
because
Yeah.
it could be, but it's an interesting thought. Like, what
Yeah.
if, what if they are different?
I have started thinking
Mm,
differently, and I wonder if they are different. So it'd probably be good to have
Yeah,
some study on that and think about it more. But in any case, the Hasatan is an office, and if you want to read back into it, the head honcho himself, the devil of the New Testament, the Satan of Chronicles and of the Second Temple period, then that's fine. I mean, it can be done, right? On a level of interpretation, but it's verse 7 that really matters for this story moving forward, doesn't it?
yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it actually is important to say that the identity of Hasatan matters.
Yeah.
But with that said, um, what regardless of who he is, what he says is critical.
Yeah.
And just just because someone determines the identity of this figure does not mean that the work is done. It's only beginning
That
because
is correct. Yep.
what he says is really what starts launching the themes moving forward. And interestingly, Hasatan doesn't show up again after the first two chapters. And so, not trying to underplay the role of Hasatan, clearly, like the beginning is very, very important. But, again, if someone's like, okay, I figured out who he is, all right, I'm done with this book. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
like, hey, take it easy. We got to read more.
And to all of our listeners, we have our Hebrew Bible book club, which you can join us on Patreon, where you can come and actually join Mati and I in a live reading of the text of the Hebrew Bible, where it's not scripted, where we haven't really planned anything out. We just read, we talk, and we discuss. You can ask questions and join us live on Patreon.